Hello and welcome to Suzi's Book Bag, hosted by me, Suzi Fay. I've gone for one of my Oxford book bags today, partly because the last time I saw this author in person was at the Oxford Literary Festival, but also because her wonderful million-plus selling series of crime novels is based in Oxford. So please welcome Cara Hunter into the book bag. Morning, Cara.
Hello. Hi. Hello. Talking from Oxford.
Yes. Yeah. Well, I mean, the first thing I wanted to say, so you've written this series of six crime novels, I think it is, with formerly DI, now DC, or is it the other way around? I'm very bad on the nomenclature. Adam Fawley.
DI, yeah, he's a DI, but I might promote him in future, but at the moment he's still a DI.
It's great. You have the power, you know.
Oh, I know. Yeah, life and death, Lindsay, life and death.
Oh, yeah. Well, we will be talking about life and death and all kinds of gruesome things over the course of the next hour or so. So I've been reading, I've read your latest and one of the series, and the first thing I wanted to ask actually was really about, it's kind of publishing question. So when you started off pitching this,
yeah,
I just wonder whether publishers sort of said something like, "Oh, Oxford, does it have to be set in Oxford? You know, it's a bit thronged with corpses already."
Yeah, well, of course, I'm surprised that the university can actually teach anyone, given that they've all been killed off one way or another. But you're right, because when I first came up with it, I mean, it started not as a police procedural at all, and certainly not as a series. It started as one idea for Close to Home, which is the first one, which is a story about a missing child. And if anyone has read that one, it's all about the twist at the end, which I'm not going to spoil, just in case. So it sort of started with a twist, and I had to work backwards, sort of create the world in which that twist would happen. But of course, being a story about a missing child, it was going to have a police angle. I mean, there was just no way out of that. So I thought, okay, well, I'll create a police team to investigate this crime. So Adam really started just as a piece of plot machinery, which in some ways is a good thing, because there wasn't too much riding on him at that time. So he was able to sort of evolve as a character. But the whole Oxford thing, I thought, absolutely, just like you just said, oh my God, no one is going to want any more crime set in Oxford. Hasn't someone done that before? You know? So I actually disguised it. I wrote it, but I disguised the town. I called it Kingstead because actually, as a lot of people will know, Oxford was Charles I's headquarters during the Civil War. So Kingstead means King's Place. So I thought, okay, well, that's quite nice, you know. And so I wrote it and called it that. And once the book had been bought by Penguin, as was then, almost the first thing my editor said to me was, "Hey, this is Oxford, isn't it?" So, of course, my career as a master of disguise never really even got off the ground. So she said, "Look, change it back. I know why you did it, but change it back. When it comes to international sales, you will thank me." And indeed, I have ever since, because obviously everybody knows Oxford. I mean, it's very well known anyway, but anyone who knows anything about crime or reads crime knows about Oxford. So I turned it back, and it doesn't seem to have done it any harm. I mean, certainly there's a lot of local people who seem to like it. They like to spot the streets in the book. Even when I change the names, they still manage to spot them. So that's fun. But yeah, I mean, I suppose the other thing about it was that right from the start, I didn't want to make it the sort of golden quad type of Oxford, which, I mean, I was at university only just before the first Morse TV came out. And it was very nostalgic even then. I mean, it was never quite as chocolate boxy as it looks on Morse. And don't get me wrong, I'm a huge Morse fan. I loved them. But it was never really the real city. And even over time with Lewis and everything, it didn't really become the real city. So I thought, well, there's a gap there. If nowhere else, there's a gap to portray different parts of the city, to get away from the university, which I tried to do as much as possible, and just give it a slightly grittier feel, make it more modern. So that's how we've ended up where we are. But you were right. I did have qualms.
I mean, there's not just Morse, which you've mentioned, but a great novel, Gaudy Nights, by Dorothy L. Sayers.
Dorothy L. Sayers, yes.
which is quite evil. I reread it recently, and I mean, I can never remember who done it, even in a book that I've read before. So, I mean, I probably read it decades ago, and her plotting is particularly evil because she drops things in very slyly that you think are the clues, and I've spotted this. Not many people would spot that, but I've clocked it, and it's completely wrong. You're completely wrong. You follow these.
I mean, that's something that I try to do, but I'm not as accomplished as Dorothy L. Sayers. But the idea of two things. One is make your reader feel clever. I mean, that's always a good thing. If
and then stupid.
Well, I try not to make them feel stupid, but make them feel clever because they recognise things. So that's always good fun. So you drop the little Easter eggs in, and I had a lot of fun doing that, particularly with the new standalone. But we'll come to that later. Yeah. But also, I mean, try to put in as many red herrings and twists as possible. I love a twist, and I try to do as many as possible, not just at the end, but to keep people reading, keep coming up with cliffhangers, and that is part of the fun. I mean, I really, really enjoy doing that. I think people love that part of reading crime fiction anyway. Even if they do get it wrong, they don't mind as long as it's a good twist.
Yes, exactly. I mean, your stuff is so twisty that I think we'll probably have to be a little bit careful how we talk about certain things. Sort of people, I can say this, I think, people not being who they say they are, sometimes multiple times. That's like the kind of present that you open, and then the box is this size, and then it's that size, and then
well, I know it's sneaky, but I mean, it's irresistible, really.
You must have a lot of fun writing them. But do you have a massive whiteboard somewhere just covered in arrows and post-it notes, or is it all up here?
It's mostly on a spreadsheet, actually. I tend to do it that way, and particularly, for the series, I always think it must be a bit like doing the Archers or something, because you've got to remember who your recurring characters are. When's his birthday? What colour eyes has he got? So there's all that sort of stuff you have to keep in mind. But particularly for chronologies, that's the thing, because I often have I'm not alone in this, but I often have more than one time frame going at the same time. So you've got to keep remembering, are they actually panning out properly? Are they sort of mapping onto each other? So getting time right, and who is where at what time is that can be the sort of headache inducing bit of it.
Yeah. I've just read a book which I will spare the author's blushes, which has a first-person narrator, maybe afterwards, Cara, maybe just you and me, where it says, at the time, I didn't notice that X, Y, Z. And it's sort of, well, if you didn't notice, you didn't notice. A character cannot go back and notice something that they didn't notice. So you can just see the author's hands right there. Do you know what I mean? Because the author noticed what was going on.
Yes.
So I mean, that's just a very minor thing. But in crime novels, I imagine you have beady readers who would get onto you and point out any, even after you've gone through your copy edit and all the other things that go on.
Yeah. It's good because it means they're reading really closely, but it also means, I mean, one thing I didn't need to learn it in a way because I knew it, but it's been sort of borne out, is that there is no reader more sophisticated than a crime aficionado. I mean, they know their stuff, they know their genre, they know the tricks you're trying to play on them, and they also know these days, I mean, like so many of us, they know all the details of things like DNA and forensics, and they will know if you're trying to pull a fast one by pretending that this part of DNA doesn't exist or something like that, sort of playing a trick. So I always think you have to, in a way, go back. We were talking golden age just now, but go back to those wonderful golden age 10 commandments for crime fiction, the Ronald Knox list.
Yes,
and really, I mean, there are some weird ones which obviously very much of the period, like secret passages and stuff like that.
It's time to bring back the secret passage.
But some of the others are so spot on. I mean, I always have a particular beef about twins, because it just seems to me a bit lazy. And Roland Knox says you can't do twins either. So, stick to that. And then, so he's really good. And the other one that I've always stuck to is, you cannot have your perpetrator turning up on page 475 because the reader just thinks that's a cheat. Who is this person? I had no way of solving this if you're only going to tell me about this killer, right at the very end. And I mean, there are books that I used to love. Patricia Cornwall, for example, I think her stuff was brilliant, but there came a point where that seemed to start happening, and I wasn't so keen on that, because I just thought I didn't feel I'd had a fair shake at actually working it out.
Yeah. Well, I interviewed Ian Rankin quite a few years ago, and I can't remember which book it was. And it was actually an interview on stage, and I said to him, I could not figure it out. I mean, I never can. I'm not that person, but I really couldn't. And he said something amazing. He said, yeah, neither could I. I had no idea who did it. And there is a character in that you're keeping an eye on. And he said, yeah, I thought he might have done it at one point. And I suppose, he's a long way into his career by now, and was then. He can kind of freestyle. But I thought that was amazing. And it was a very good way of making it unguessable if he couldn't guess it himself.
Wow. Yeah. Well, good for him.
I've never heard of anyone doing that before, but that was hilarious. Now, do you ascribe to the kind of Wilkie Collins verisimilitude thing, like if there's a 19 bus, it has to go from a certain place to a certain place? You can't change the course of the 19 bus to everything's got to go with the railway timetable or the street plan, or which I think was his goal, and he didn't always achieve it apparently. But do you think that's important?
I think so, to a degree, or certainly when it matters, back to things like, DNA and forensics, just pretending, that something doesn't exist because it happens to be inconvenient for you, for your plot. Yeah. I mean, that's, you can't do. I think that's part of the contract with the reader. If there are small things I've changed, like I sort of shunted a building in Oxford up the road a bit so I could have it opposite somewhere else, which is not actually where it is, but it's close enough.
It's not Christchurch or or Merton.
No. You need a big sort of bulldozer to move Christchurch. So I just shunted something slightly, but that sort of thing doesn't really matter. And I think, and I always put something in the end saying that there are little bits and pieces here which may be slightly different for people who know the town. But people are very passionate about their town. I mean, I more than once had people say to me, "You have characters refer to the hospital, the John Radcliffe, as the John Rad," and no one calls it that. Everyone calls it the JR. And I thought, well, I have actually heard someone call it the John Rad, so it's not that bad. But I was partly doing it because if you don't live in Oxford, just calling something the JR is quite, it's quite difficult to work out what they're referring to. And so, the John Rad made it more likely they'd work out it was the hospital. So there you are. There's, people are passionate about the details. Yeah,
well, actually, JR is mentioned. I don't know I can't remember which one it's in. And it did fox me for a moment, but the context made it quite clear, and I had heard of the world famous John Radcliffe. So yeah, I mean, that's that kind of balance you have to do with people who know the place really well, and somebody who's reading in Idaho or whatever, who's there in imagination, so it has to feel pretty real. I'm just going to very quickly read something. I pretty much opened this at random. So this is Hope to Die.
Right. Most recent Fawley,
This made me so this is number 6, isn't it, in the series? And the next one is a standalone. But I pretty much opened this at random, and this is what I found. Ichabod Crane, I presume, says Colin Body, surveying the corpse. The body has been stripped and laid out on the table, but there's only a scatter of teeth and skull fragments where the head should be. The recovered brain matter is on the trolley, a gravelly, bright red sludge in a gleaming stainless steel basin. I mean, this is quite an important part of being a crime writer these days, isn't it? I mean, you know, getting down with the gore.
Yeah, well, yeah. I mean, I'm really lucky. I have a forensic science advisor who used to be a practicing forensic science, a person on crime scenes. And not only is he incredibly experienced, he's got the most wicked sense of humor.
Right.
I think it's some sort of protective covering they develop when they do a job like that. So he knows everything there is to know about everything. But I've had to sort of work out now that what questions I ask him, you know, and how I phrase it. Because if I'll ask him, for example, so what actually happens if you get shot in the face at close range? He'll actually send me a photo. Which is not necessarily what you want to see. So I have to be a bit careful now. And I also should check with him when he sends attachments. So what actually is that? But, you know, he's brilliant. In fact, he was at the Oxford Literary Festival when this year when you were there. We did a crime panel where I was talking to him and my DI friend who helps me on the police side. And we did a really enjoyable session where it was, what does TV crime get wrong? So I'd sort of picked out bits and pieces and had some images from, you know, things like Line of Duty or the CSI, the series. And they just went off. It was just brilliant. You know, it wasn't anything down to me. The audience were lapping it up. I was just like being the referee in the middle. And it was just so much fun. And he's so entertaining. But people learned so much, as well as, you know, he managed to make it funny but serious at the same time.
I think, as you say, it's a kind of protective coating as well, isn't it? The humour must be part of it because it's quite grim. And I think I had a little chat with him, you know, probably in the green room or when we were having a drink afterwards or something. And he was saying, oh, yes, hit someone in the head with an axe. And it's totally different from the blood spatter is totally different if you stab them with a...
I know. I know. He has as you found out, he has a marvelous ability to just tell it like it is.
Yes. Yeah. And in a way, I'm sure a description is better than a picture. I mean, you're not going to have pictures in the book. But in Hope to Die, yes, this unfortunate, he has indeed been shot in the face at very close range. And, you know, we can't really talk about any of it, I think, but it is quite a ride. It is quite an extraordinary ride.
And it's based on a real story as well, which you probably picked up on. It was inspired is not a word I like because it doesn't sound quite right, but perhaps triggered. I don't know what the right word is, but it came from a real life case in Australia, which I'm an absolute addict of true crime, as so many people are these days. But so I watch a lot of it. I read a lot of it. When I first came across this case in Australia, I just could not believe it. It was genuinely jaw dropping. That there's the woman who had 3 babies by the time she was about 24, something like that from memory. And she'd been living at home with her parents. She'd been playing water polo, which is not exactly, you know, you wear, you know, revealing swimming costumes when you're playing water polo. And she'd had 3 babies that apparently no one knew anything about. No one knew she was pregnant. And then she had three children, and she had 2 of them adopted, the first one and the third one. But the middle one just disappeared. And it's quite an extraordinary story. They've never found the baby. She keeps insisting that she gave it to the biological father, but anything she's ever said about this man doesn't stack up. So while there must have been a man involved, it certainly wasn't the man that she's told people about. And she was convicted, which is, as everyone who knows anything about crime knows, you know, a no-body conviction is an extremely hard thing to achieve. But she's convicted and she's still in prison. I think she might be up for parole next year. So this story sort of had its seed in that real-life case. And to be honest, if I'd written the story without that, I think I would have thought, no, this is completely unbelievable. I'm never going to get away with this. No one is going to believe that this is feasible. But it happened. So there you are.
That's the great thing about real life. It doesn't have to be plausible.
Exactly. Is it that Tom Clancy quote about the difference between real life and fiction is that fiction has to make sense?
Yeah. I mean, it's really true. I was reading it and I hadn't read the kind of, you put it in an afterword.
Yeah.
and thinking, I mean, it's part of the power of the story in a way, because you keep thinking, how can this be? Like, and also this person is a compulsive liar.
Yeah.
Which is a very interesting aspect, because in a way it helps you keep the story mysterious, but I mean, compulsive lying is a thing, and it's fascinating psychologically.
Yeah, it is, and there comes a point with certain types, as far as I, not being a trained psychologist, that some people don't even realize they're doing it. It's just, it just happens. It's not a conscious decision in the way that you or I might say, oh, I've got to get myself out of a difficult situation, I'm going to lie. That type of mental process doesn't happen. It just doesn't seem to them to be a bad thing or a wrong thing. They just do it. It's very, very, very mysterious.
A sort of preferred version of reality. That then it is clung to, and then it sort of does become,
but then changes if it needs to. It morphs, without any apparent sort of sense of, oh, I'm changing my story. I mean, I've seen a couple of documentaries featuring this woman in Australia, and she's just completely unaccountable, because she'll say one thing in one interview with a journalist, and then later says something else, and there's no sense in which there's any disconnect here. So she's impossible to get any sort of traction on what she thinks really happened, because she just keeps telling you different things, apparently sincerely. That's the other thing. She doesn't appear to realize that this doesn't come over as anything other than insincere. So it's very strange.
I think people like that would probably also beat polygraphs, wouldn't they?
Yeah, I suspect so. Yeah, because I think polygraphs is all about. I mean, a lot of people would say they're not actually, viable because it's junk science. Some people would say that, but the whole basis of it, as far as I understand, is it's your reaction to telling a lie because you feel guilty about it. You get the heart rate and everything else. If you don't feel guilty about it, you're not going to react. So you're just going to beat the polygraph, because you just, it's just like saying the truth if you're that type of person.
That reminds me of one of my favourite jokes, which is somebody who gets up to all sorts of bad behaviour, and then is told they must go and get therapy, and then they come back and say, I'm now completely fine, and then they do it again, and they say, but I don't feel at all guilty. I don't feel at all ashamed.
Exactly. Okay, well, whatever.
Similar sort of thing, before it's all I feel terrible, and now it's
I'm fine with it. Yeah.
So it's a sort of series of 6. So discounting the first one, like you said, you didn't know it was even going to be a series. Have they all sprung from something you've spotted in real life?
A lot of them have. Yeah, worked? Sometimes there's only quite a small element of the story. I mean, the second one starts with a girl found in a basement, a locked basement in a big old house in Oxford. So obviously that started with the whole Fritzl case in Australia, with Austria. Sorry, there are too many similar sounding countries here. Austria, where the father had imprisoned his daughter for years in a basement, and he'd had children with her, and it's just absolutely horrific story. And then after that, there were a couple of other similar stories, not involving parents that time, in America, in Cleveland. So that was the sort of idea of finding somebody in a basement, and then how did they get there? What were they doing there? But that was all that story took from the Fritzl case. There wasn't anything else that I took from that case. It was just the initial sort of opening moment. Yeah. And the third one, which starts with a house fire, I was looking at sort of family annihilators in that book, and there was again, a really sad case. Christopher Foster, a man I'm trying to remember where exactly it was, somewhere like Shropshire, who killed his entire family, then set the whole place on fire. So it was there are elements like that where it gives you an idea of something to explore, rather than the entire story. The Hope to Die, the one we've just been talking about, follows a real case more closely. I mean, obviously I've changed it. It's not the same case. It's not the same person, but it follows it more closely. But most of the others, the sort of initial spark is smaller, and then sort of turns into something else. But yeah, I mean, I watch so much true crime. I get an awful lot of interesting elements of stories from people's actual motivations as well, the why rather than the what or the how.
Yeah, I suppose if you figured that out, you can put everything into place and kind of reverse engineer anything, because
Absolutely.
you have to work backwards, don't you? But I mean, this is the thing that I've always wondered. I mean, I did briefly meet Ruth Rendell. I mean, do you go into a dark place, or is it quite easy to shake off? I mean, in Hope to Die, this poor faceless person, and who exactly they are is part of the mystery. I began to feel very sorry. And you, as you said earlier on, you have to kill people. You have the power. Can you shake it off at the end of the writing day?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, I've frightened a few of my friends since I started this game. So didn't know you were that sort of person. Yeah, I suppose so. I mean, I try not to do anything too gratuitous. I mean, the bit that you read out is probably as bad as mine get. I don't do the sort of, decapitation or disemboweling type of fiction. So it's not usually quite that grim. But yeah, I mean, you have to. I think any crime writer would say the same, that you have to be able to reverse back out of it as well. But also, part of doing crime is about the not just the bad things people do, but the people like the police who are trying to, as it were, shine a light in the darkness. And that's what you can cling on to. The sort of moral center of the book is the people who are trying to do the right thing. So, yeah. It's a conundrum. It's if you're going to write about this sort of thing, you're going into dark places, definitely.
Yeah, by definition. But also, I mean, crime fiction can really look at sort of social issues and social problems. Yeah, and that's another really interesting, a kind of cathartic thing that it can do, or make you think more deeply about certain fissures in society.
Absolutely. And I actually think that crime fiction is a good place to look at some of these things, because partly because it has a wide reach. And so a lot of people will engage with crime books more so than they will with sociology. That's for a start. But also because it's portraying people in extreme situations, it does give you an opportunity to look at some of these issues, trends, phenomena. I mean, the most two obvious ones. One was the first book, Close to Home. I really wanted to look at the impact of social media there. I mean, that book was written in 2016, so it's a while ago now. But I wanted to look at the impact of the trolling that the parents get when the child goes missing, and how that leaks into real life. Because certainly back then, I think we're a bit more, aware of these things now. But back then, there was quite a sense that, that something like Twitter was like a sealed unit, and you could say whatever you liked. There were no comebacks. There was no, there's no sort of moral code. We know how to deal with people in conversation. We wouldn't say certain things to someone or write them down in an email, but we seem to think we can say whatever we like on social media with a no comeback. So I wanted to look at that and see some of the real life consequences of that. So in that book, there's a point where there's sort of hatred and the vigilante side of it leaks into real life with tragic consequences. So that was definitely something I wanted to look at in that book. And later on in the fourth book, which is called All the Rage, I look at the incel phenomenon, which again, back then, I think it was 2018 then, wasn't really that well known. I certainly didn't know much about it. And so I had to go and do some research and looked at sort of, chat boards and things like that. And it was horrific, absolutely horrific. I had no idea, the sort of online hate communities. So I really wanted to look at that. And I replicated some of that sort of material in the book, and I toned it down considerably, and it's still bad and is bad. And in a way, I didn't feel it was wrong to do that. I wanted it to look that bad on the page because I wanted people to realize that this was happening. That too many people were ignorant, not through any fault of their own. They just didn't know it was there. So I just wanted to bring it up and make it into something that people were aware of by using the book to do that. It was one of the things I wanted to do. And since then, I think we are now more aware. But at the time, it really was under the radar. So yeah, I think you're right. You can actually engage with difficult topics, actually, but by showing in a novel how they're affecting real people. So it's not a theoretical issue. It's an issue of how do you deal with this if you actually have to confront it as a human being. I think the novels can actually do that, and I think crime can do it pretty well. And if it's a good book, it really can.
So Adam and his team, as you kind of said, he was sort of a plot device to begin with. And obviously the character has developed, but surely there are things that you have to swerve. There are cliches that you have to swerve, aren't there? From TV, kind of mismatched buddy, detective who can't sort his own life out, all this sort of thing. So how do you go about? I mean, I love the way that you have little biogs at the beginning.
Yes.
To open this, so handy, very handy.
It is, isn't it? Well, the funny thing about that was I started doing it, I think, in book 4. Because I thought, well, even someone who's read them all before won't have read them all for a while, probably. So, let's give them a chance. And also, if you're coming to it for the first time, you want to make it accessible to someone who's just picked this one up rather than having read anything at all. But for me, it was such an obvious thing. I suppose having done English literature at university, it's just straight out the 19th century novel. I mean, really, I didn't see it as anything unusual or innovative. But the number of people who said to me, wow, I've never seen this before. It's so useful. And I thought, but I'm not claiming it. I'm not claiming it as mine because I've seen it done so many times. But it is helpful, I think. But yeah,
well, it's quite a big team.
Yeah.
And it kind of means you don't. In some series, there's always a bit at the beginning that kind of does that recap, like, how's the divorce going, or whatever, or since he moved out of, and those are the laborious bits. And if you just put it all at the beginning, you can just leap straight in. It's quite
exactly
clever.
I mean, you don't have to do the dreaded info dump. Oh, by the way, let's just chuck all this stuff in. I deliberately don't want to do that. And if you want to read it, those bios you can. You don't have to. You can skip them and you go, straight in. But back to what you said about avoiding cliches. I mean, I definitely didn't want Adam to be that sort of maverick, jazz-loving, divorced, alcoholic. So, I mean, there are plenty of really great coppers out there in fiction who are just like that, but we've got enough of them, I think. So I deliberately made him a nice guy who's in love with his wife. I mean, they have a tragic backstory, but through no fault of their own. And he was also like a negative version of Morse, negative in the sense of like a photographic negative, and that he's not a loner. He doesn't like classical music. I actually have him saying close to home right at the beginning, I say, the car's a Ford and I don't do bloody crosswords. I thought, I gotta get out there with this first up, haven't I? I've really got to face up to the whole Morse thing and just say I'm not Morse. So he's more believable in some ways, I think, as a copper, because he's just ordinary in lots of good ways. He has a great personality characteristics and some dodgy ones, but he's just an ordinary guy, and that's more believable.
And then he's got a sort of growing team around him, and then, like you say, you can promote him whenever you want to.
And change the team around as well, which I do as well, because even though it's quite a nice dynamic, I'm always hyper and paranoid about it becoming stale or familiar. So every now and again you can shove a new member of the team in, and that shakes it up a bit. And so I mean, that's the thing about series. There are so many wonderful things about writing a series, and you've got your setting, you've got your characters, you've hopefully got readers who are already invested in those people, but the danger is that it starts to tail off a bit. And I was so hyper, conscious of not letting that happen. It's one reason I decided to do the standalone, because I thought I think 6 is fine. I don't think, they're all fine. I don't want it to be the next one that comes along isn't quite as good. That'd be the worst thing. So park it for a bit. let Adam have a rest from me have a rest from him, and come back to it afterwards, which, you know, I'm writing the next one now. So we're now back into book 7. But I think the break has been good. The break has been good.
Right. Okay. So, well, let's move on to the next one. Murder in the Family. And this is written in a totally different way. I mean, I don't know if there are other examples in crime fiction that approach telling the story in quite this way, but there is, let's just say, there's no through written prose at all.
None at all.
It is all told in kind of document fashion. So was that something that you just thought, aha, this is what I'm going to do, or now I have to find a story to fit that method of storytelling, or did it come about in a different way?
Well, you'll know from Hope to Die that I do put quite a lot of documents in. I mean, this whole thing, it's called, publishers call it mixed media these days. So,
so there is a sort, there's transcripts and things,
yes,
so it looks different from...
So I do that in the previous books, and the more I've done it over the 6 books, the more people seem to like it, you know. So I always try to put in something new in each one. So I've had TV transcripts before, I've had podcasts, I've had body maps, I've had actual maps. I've tried always to put something new and different in, and people just seem to love it because they say it allows them to be a detective. So they feel they're getting to the raw material of the case, so they can have a go at solving it. And I love doing it anyway. I'm a complete geek. I do all the artwork and stuff myself, which is, you know, just completely geeky. But I love doing that, and I love that type of way of telling a story. And so I think it was because I got this idea for the standalone, and it's this, you know, the elevator pitch for it is basically it's true crime TV meets Agatha Christie. So it's like a very, very new way of telling a crime story that we're all very familiar with now, the crime documentary, but a very, very traditional setup with basically like, and then there were none. So you've got a closed circle of suspects, and they're isolated in some way, physically or psychologically or wherever. And so it has to be one of them. And over time, they realize that one of them is indeed the killer. So that was the idea, marrying the old and the new. And having done transcripts in the books before, I suddenly thought, I can do the whole thing here. I can push that idea to its complete logical extreme. So I did away with myself as the death of the author. I did away with myself entirely, and just did it through the transcripts and through emails between the participants and, you know, the maps and the family trees and everything else. So it's told that way, and people just seem to really like it. I mean, some people say it takes a bit of time to get used to. That's fine. It's different. But then they say, once I was in, you know. So it was fantastically fun to write. Though it was quite like 3-dimensional chess as well, because, you know, all of the challenges of seeding in, you know, the clues and making sure that the information is dripping out, and making sure you had nice twists and cliffhangers, especially at the end of each of the episodes, because we read it as a series of episodes. So all of that was, you know, the normal challenges of writing crime fiction, but on top of the fact that I couldn't tell anyone anything really. They had to work it all out for themselves. I mean, there's a hint sometimes in the stage directions, you know, so you can get a sort of a sense that, you know, the tensions between the group, because, you know, they're sort of looking at each other, but that's all. I mean, there really isn't anything of me in there telling the reader anything. They are really there on their own working this one out, and they seem to like it.
I think if you're anyone, you might be the director of the series. So just to talk about the structure, it is a reopening of a cold case. And it's one of those, a bit like those podcasts that re-examine all the evidence. It's a TV show. The location changes. You have the call sheet. With, you know, breakfast will be at such and such a time. There is no parking on site. And all this kind of thing.
Oh, you can imagine how much geeky fun I have with that.
Oh, yes. Well, you did have a particular bit of geeky fun. Twice over, I wonder if I can find this, but so yes, Dry Riser Films Limited, producer Nick Vincent, director Guy Howard, I think you might be Guy Howard, film editor Fabio Barry. hang on a minute. Are these all real people? I know Fabio Barry.
I know. Yes, they're not all real people.
And he even turns up in another guise.
I know, a picture of him looking particularly.
How can I do that? Yeah, there he is. So there, he's a TV critic, which I was at one point. So that was a lot of fun.
Well,
so
he desperately wanted to be in it. So I said, okay. I mean, I often put my friends.
It's not what he says. He says it's you. There was, according to him, there's no begging involved at all.
Oh, he was such a fibber. I shall screen grab the Instagram messages where he's saying, "Where am I in your new book?" No, I do put my friends' names in as sort of minor characters sometimes, because the nature of the way I write them, I always have to have loads of names, witnesses and whatever. So
yes,
a lot of my friends are in them one way or another. So far, no one's been killed or mutilated, but there's always time.
Yeah.
But I mean, there's other geeky fun in it. For example, there's a crime chat board again in this one, where they after each of the episodes, true crime fans get together and talk about what they're looking at the case, and they're looking at what's been on the documentary, and they've all obviously got usernames, and one of them's actually Ron Jeebus, that may or may not be an echo of John Rebus. So I told Ian Rankin that. I said, I'll put you in, and he thought that was fun too. So
I didn't even spot that. That's very clever. And of course, you can use the chat board idea to send little theories running hither and yon.
Yeah, you've spotted it.
And you also get the tone right, because it's all this, I think I think we need to watch that person. It's,
well, these aficionados are so, expert at spotting, what's not being said as much as what is being said. So, that was a very, a fun way of doing it, and having the TV review after each episode as well. So that's a way of looking at some of the moral issues that are raised by this type of TV, which, people sometimes say, is this the right sort of thing that we should be watching as entertainment? So I was able to look at some of those things through the TV review. So he's actually looking at whether, is there an exploitative element of this type of television? So it enabled me to get a lot of different perspectives in a way that was quite easy to read and hopefully quite fun. But it gives a sort of wider perspective than simply the whodunit element of it.
Yeah, again, it's the sort of the moral element of how we report on things. What is it really entertainment?
Yeah.
So let's talk about the crime itself. What are they reopening and looking at? What is this?
Well, it was 20 years before. Yeah, 20 years before, and it was the unexplained killing of a young man called Luke Ryder, who's in his 20s.
You do like killing young men. I mean, just
well, I suppose with most crime fiction is there's far too many young women being murdered, isn't there? So sometimes I suppose it's nice not to do something that happens all too often in real life. But yes, so it's a man this time. And he's a young Australian, and he's in London, and he's recently married an extremely wealthy, much older woman.
I keep wanting to say, or did he, or is he, or because it's that sort of book. But go on.
As far as we know, at least to start with. So he's found in the garden. She lives in Camden Hill, so this beautiful, big house in Camden Hill, and he's found in the garden, and there's a huge investigation. It's one of those cases that goes, mega in terms of national press coverage, but it's never solved. So 20 years later, the stepson, who was only a child of 10 at the time, of Luke Ryder, who's now a filmmaker, Guy Howard, decides his family needs some closure after all this time, himself and his two older sisters. And he decides to reinvestigate the case. And it's this Dry Riser film company that picks that up. And it's Nick Vincent, who will become a very big character as time goes on in the book, who's the producer.
Yes, I think so I've got that wrong. I think you're the producer.
Oh,
you're
thanks.
Not Guy Howard. I think you're the producer who's pulling it all together.
It's not very nice.
Just functionally.
I think I'd like Tom Hollander to play him if it goes to TV. Well, it hopefully will go to TV, but I think Tom Hollander would just eat that part up. He'd just be so brilliant at it. But anyway, that's a side issue. So what they do in order to look at this case, what Nick Vincent does is he collects together a group of experts. So we have 2 retired police officers, one's American, one's a Brit from the Met, which of course in itself is getting a bit controversial. We also have a forensic psychologist. We have a CSI expert. We have a lawyer. So we bring all these people together to reinvestigate this crime. And I've seen TV shows that are just like that. So that was where one of the seeds for this book was actually seeing exactly that format on TV. But I realized I was watching the real one on TV, and thinking, but what about if there was a lot more going on in that team than appeared to start with? And there was actually quite a lot of secrets within the team, and you start to get tensions within the team. So that was where it started to get interesting, and where the whole Agatha Christie side comes in, that none of these people are quite as straightforward as they appear to start with. And over time, we gradually realize that, and they know more, and they're more invested in some aspects of this case than has been divulged at the beginning.
And at the same time, the structure allows it to be an in real time investigation. So episode 1, they're all just meeting each other. So they actually discover this. And as your pretend TV critic points out, yet another twist. Oh, who could have seen that coming? So, you obviously had lots and lots of fun. And of course, the team, because they're all experts, they've all got secrets, but the actual personalities come out, and they start resenting each other rather than resent, well, you're just a, psychologist or whatever. That's not as good as me. I'm a...
And then when there's sort of assumptions of superiority as well, because the American detective particularly clearly thinks he's running the show, which everybody else gradually gets more and more pissed off about.
Yes.
So there's all of that. So the dynamic between them was a lot of fun to do, but it was just sort of the choreography of it. So to actually spread it out over the required time, and to just organize the reveals as we went along. And it was really complicated, but boy, was it fun. It was the most fun thing I've ever written. It really was.
And so that's sort of pretty recently published, isn't it? I think, it is your latest.
20th of July. So very recent.
Just looking at, I've got the press release here. Is it a real house or?
Well, that's a good question. It's actually inspired by a house I know of but have never been to.
Right.
My grandmother who used to live in Fulham. So we're back when Fulham was not fashionable, and we're talking about the beginning of the 20th century. And she used to clean a house in Kensington. And she used to tell me about it when I was a little girl. It was a huge house that was almost sort of concealed behind, the stucco 4-story terraces that we're very used to. And it does actually exist. And I just thought, oh, wow, this idea of a house that is almost behind other houses, that has a huge amount of grounds and exists in the middle of London, you wouldn't believe. I've never been there. But it is still there.
Yeah.
But I moved it to Camden Hill because I thought, no, I don't want people to think it's actually that house. So
yes,
I moved it somewhere else, so it doesn't. But it does come from something I was told when I was very small.
Right, it's its own secret little world.
Yeah, exactly.
Where this happens, which does become part of the whole story. It came out in July. And previous books, you've been nominated as a sort of 100 best crime novels since the war. You've been a Richard and Judy pick. These books, the Fawley books, have been optioned for TV. I think you were telling me that in Oxford.
Yes.
But there's a new twist with this one. Apparently, you're very big on TikTok.
Exactly.
You're going to have to start telling novels.
I'll tell you
TikTok,
I'll tell you the whole story. Sunday morning, so we're talking 4 or 5 days ago now. I do what I do when I wake up, what everyone who has a new book out does, even if they claim they don't. I know they do, which is go and check your Amazon chart place. So I'm fessing up. I do that. And the night before, it had been something like 35, something like that, which is good. I mean, because, the Amazon chart is everything. It's cookery books, it's children's books, it's everything. So I thought, well, no, that's not bad. And then I woke up Sunday morning and I did this, and it was number 1. And I thought, hang on a minute, what happened there? Well, it turned out I only had to wait about 5 minutes. I got this WhatsApp message from a friend who's going, oh my God, you've gone viral on TikTok. I had no idea. So she sent me a link, because I'm actually not on TikTok. But she sent me a link, and I went and had a look. And somebody had posted a really nice little video, book talk, as they call it, video of herself opening her copy. It had been sent from Amazon, obviously, and she was opening the box and then just flicking through it. So you could see the sort of layout was very different, which I think might be one reason why it got picked up. It looked different. And she was just saying, this looks interesting. And by the time I saw it on Sunday morning, it had 1.6 million views. And it's now at 3.9 million. It's just outstanding. I mean, it's almost insane that something like that could happen. And so the book's been sort of, number 1, I think 3 or 4 days this week on Amazon. My publishers have had to reprint copies already. It's just incredible, just most extraordinary thing. And it just comes out of nowhere. You can't predict it. It just either happens or it doesn't. And it's a really interesting phenomenon, I think, for publishing, that book talk is so powerful. And there are people who become astonishing successes, like Colleen Hoover or somebody like that, whose books have got picked up on Book Talk and now is just a multi-million international bestseller. But that's the power of that particular community. And I've never really encountered that at all before, certainly not in relation to one of my own books.
Yeah, it probably works. I know it works really well for YA.
Yeah.
So
it's a very young demographic.
Yeah. People have talked about that for a while. And I suppose with something like crime, I mean, I'd love there to be kind of literary TikTok, and maybe there is. I don't know if it has quite the same effect, but
I don't know.
But it's not even somebody reading the book. It is sort of the first. This looks really interesting. I'm looking forward to this.
Yeah, in this particular case, no, but I think some of them that go viral are people saying, I love this, and people picking up on it. But yes, in this case, it was just, and as I say, I suspect something to do with the fact that the layout of the book was visible on the video, so people were able to see that. And perhaps this type of mixed media appeals to the younger demographic as well. That I suspect may be one factor. But again, I mean, it's almost one of these inexplicable mysteries that either happen or they don't. I just feel very, very thankful that it happened to me.
Yeah, and you can't make it happen.
No, not at all. In fact, that's counterproductive if you try. Yeah, that's counterproductive.
Yeah, I mean, I suppose it's this community that kind of organises itself, and any. Interference from outside would be kind of resented, and it just does its own thing. I mean, I know publishers.
There's nothing wrong with that. Yeah,
publishers are fascinated by it, but don't really understand.
Well, in a way, that's good, isn't it? It's good to have something that has a life of its own.
Yeah. Well, let's talk about a more old-fashioned way of getting books out there. Do you go to these specialist crime festivals like Harrogate? And I have been to Harrogate once, but I was interviewing Claire Tomalin about Dickens, so I wasn't sort of in the bar with all the hard-boiled crime writers. I probably should have been. But yeah, it's slightly terrifying to think of a bunch of crime writers all together in a confined space. What do you get up to? Is
what
it
the
fun
collective
meeting
noun for crime writers should be? It's like a murder of crows. What should it?
Yeah.
It was fun this year. I mean, it was the rail people did their best to put the kibosh on it by having a strike both the day I was going up and the day I was supposed to come home. But I mean, it was packed, which is
this Harrogate?
Lovely. This is Harrogate, yeah. So the crime festival, and I did a really nice panel. We were talking about police procedurals, and 2 of the guys on it were ex-coppers. So we got hilarious anecdotes about things that happened to them. And it's just a really nice group of people who come to it, the audiences, because they're really well informed and they know their crime, and you can catch up with other writers, because it's quite a solitary profession, as you know. You don't spend a lot of time outside your own room and chained to your laptop. So it's always nice to do anything that will mean you can meet either readers or other writers, because I always learn something at something like that. Someone will come up to you and say something which you hadn't thought about before, which is always useful.
Yeah, and I think crime writers often are based around the country, aren't they? It's not like they're all concentrated in Hampstead or something. So it's probably where
Oxford.
you all, or Oxford.
We have got a few here.
Right. Oh dear, you'll have to eliminate all the others. No,
the mysterious deaths of the Oxford-based crime writer.
There you go. You can have that. 5% royalties.
Okay.
Because I suppose, so this is a standalone, and you're already going back to the series, but presumably, if the right idea comes along, there'll be another standalone and another strange way of telling a story.
There would be. I would love to do similar format again, to be honest. Obviously it can't be exactly the same. You couldn't rerun the and then there were none element of it, because that's just a repetition. Who wants to do that? But if I can come up with something else to actually write it this way, given that people seem to like it, why wouldn't you? And like I say, it was more fun than anything else I've ever written, so it would make sense to do it again.
Were there any moments we thought, if only I could put a paragraph in as like a written through bit that makes something clear? Or was it sort of more stimulating in a way, not to cheat?
It was more stimulating not to cheat. I'm sort of, in a way, reminded, do you remember when they still had cigarette advertising, and the cigarette advertising became incredibly creative because they couldn't show the product? Do you remember? There was some really, it was like the restraints on the creativity made it more creative. So I sort of think it's a bit like that because I had self-imposed rules, I had to be more creative in working around them, rather than just sort of banging in a paragraph about what somebody was thinking. I thought it was actually quite stimulating not to be able to do that and to find other ways to get the information out. I really liked the fact that I kept to my rules and didn't try and twist it, let myself off.
It is one of my objections to some crime writers that sometimes you can kind of see, like, well, why is that character having that conversation with that character? And you just know it's because there's a clue, it can be quite subtly done, but you still have a sense that either you're being misdirected or there's something you're meant to pick up on. And,
absolutely,
if you spot it, but like I say, Dorothy L. Sayers makes you think you've.
Well, she's one of the queens of crime for a reason.
yeah, and isn't there a club, an elite club of crime writers? Is it the Detection Society or something like that? It's
I
so
don't know.
elite.
I'm not in it anyway.
So elite, you haven't. Well, you'd probably have to kill me if you said anything about it. So, my good friend Christopher Fowler, who sadly died earlier this year, he only got inducted in it just before. They left it quite late with him, and he'd done about 20 books in the Bryant and May series. So I think it's a bit like the Magic Circle, that we're probably not even supposed to mention it, and I can't remember what it's called. So. But I have heard there's a little bit of kind of robes and shenanigans and fun that goes on. Maybe. Lord, well, I've probably ruined it for you now, Cara. I've ruined it.
I'll never be invited now.
No. Dear me, I'll probably never be able to review another crime writer. Anyway, that's what I've heard. It's probably all made up. Maybe my leg was being pulled, but anyway.
Never believe anything a crime writer tells you.
Yeah, well, that's another thing, isn't it? You are, professionally deceptive, every single one of you. I mean, Ian Rankin's good fun, isn't he?
He's a lovely
I'm sure
guy.
you have a riot when you're all together. Val McDermid looked like she likes a laugh, Good person to have a
it's a
pint
good fun
with.
group of people. Yeah, it's a good fun group of people. We have a little Oxford crime writers group where we get together for lunch once or twice a year, and that's always good fun. And we write quite different sorts of stuff, which is quite useful, really.
Yeah. I mean, I did have a brief meeting with Ruth Rendell, and she didn't seem that clubbable, to be honest. She actually did seem a rather frightening human being. But anyway, takes all sorts. Okay, so I will I'll ask you my 3 questions now, if that's okay, that I ask everybody. So, Cara, what is your favourite artwork?
Well, this was a really difficult one, because, you don't tend to think of having a favourite artwork. Do you know what I mean? It's you have a sort of a favourite period or a favourite artist. So I thought about it a lot, but I'm going to go for a Poussin, actually, which is the Etienne Arcadia Ego one, which everyone will recognise how it looks.
That's one of my favourites.
It's beautiful. It's basically the shepherds in this beautiful pastoral landscape looking at a tomb, and it's inscribed Etienne Arcadia Ego, which basically means even in paradise I am here, i.e. death is present everywhere. But it's a beautifully done picture. It's got so much resonance in terms of what it's trying to say, as well as how well it looks, and just to, the feast for the eyes. So there you are. That's mine.
Yeah, that is a brilliant choice, and a treasured book I have. There was a Poussin exhibition, I think it was in '95 at the Royal Academy, and I've still got the catalogue. And I didn't know much about Poussin. All I knew was Dance to the Music of Time,
which is another wonderful one.
Which is in the Wallace collection, and I only knew that through Anthony Pole's 12 novel series, which I'm a big fan of. But yeah, his work overall just blew me away, and that I don't know where that painting is. It might be in the Prado or somewhere like that, but it's full of mystery.
Yeah, exactly. Well, I'm a mystery writer, so I suppose that's only appropriate.
No, I think that's an absolutely brilliant choice. But we will get on to books. Is there a book you've always intended to get around to and feel a bit bad about not having read?
Yeah, you called this in your email the Book of Shame.
Yes.
And it's actually a really mean one to ask anyone who's done an English literature degree, because they sort of feel they have to confess. I mean, there are certainly wilder reaches of Charles Dickens I've never got to. I mean, never got to Martin Chuzzlewit, for a start.
Right. Okay.
But the one I think I should have read and I haven't read is To Kill a Mockingbird.
Oh. Wow, you managed to avoid reading that, as a teenager. When it wasn't
on the syllabus at all. No, I mean, I know it is now. It's very, very common, isn't it? But not then.
I think it's almost going out again. Do you know what I mean? I think it's sort of coming and it's going out because of the kind of racial background of the story and the slight, white savior aspect of it. But it is a really wonderful exercise in the voice, I think.
Well, you're selling it to me, Suzi.
Yeah. And, I mean, not to put any pressure on you here, but people have said things like Ulysses and Don Quixote. I think you've got for something you could probably read it in a couple of days.
It's short, isn't it? And I have to confess, I have read Ulysses, because I did read that at university. I haven't read Don Quixote, but I have read Ulysses.
Yeah. So
I haven't read Finnegan's Wake, and the reason for that is that no one has ever read Finnegan's Wake. Anyone who tells you they've read it is fibbing. No one has ever read it, apart from James Joyce, obviously.
Yeah, people have probably written books about it that haven't read it. I think I saw it in the James Joyce Museum in Dublin, and it was just open. They have a display copy, and it was just open, and not doing that.
It'll send you balmy. It really will.
I mean, he did decide just to drive the novel up a dead-end street and crash the novel into the wall at the end. I think that's...
Well, there was a radio play a while back, and someone referred to James Joyce as treating the English language like an adventure playground, which I thought was absolutely marvellous.
Yeah. But that makes it sound fun. And
if you're going to do Joyce, do Ulysses. Yeah.
Yeah.
but that's
I
long.
mean, Ulysses is readable. You can get through Ulysses.
Yeah,
I think
Dublin is readable.
People think it's harder than it is, you know. It's definitely readable. Okay, last question. I mean, with all these TikTokers and reviewers and Goodreads and beady people who turn up at events, have you ever had any really bizarre or funny feedback about your work?
Yes. This one, we're back to Amazon again, because there's the phenomenon of your reading your Amazon reviews, which I do not generally recommend, because it's while there are obviously some wonderful things in there, there are also some you start thinking I should reply to that, and you obviously no, better not to. But it's hilarious, because the ones that break your heart are the 2 stars, because the 2 stars are people who have actually read the book. Generally, the 1 stars. Now the 1 stars.
The bag I bought it in ripped, and
basically, yes, the
person at the counter was really mean. 1 star.
Or it didn't arrive on time. There's another one. You're thinking, well, what's that got to do with me? But my favourite 1 star was someone saying it's not science fiction. No.
Wow. Okay.
They never said it was.
Bad. You're bad. So the 2 stars, they hurt because people have put a bit of effort into it.
And they've probably read it. Whereas the 1 stars tend to be people who are, have got some other sort of grievance, which may or may not have anything to do with you.
I think there's something about authors that people think it doesn't hurt you or affect you. And I'm thinking of when I did an event with an author and somebody put their hand up and said, and she'd written a famous book that did really well and was carrying on, with her career doing other books, but they didn't do quite as well as this particular book. Again, I won't say who it is. But somebody put their hand up and said, I loved your famous book. This one, I didn't really like it as much. And to sort of say that in a room with about 200 people, didn't like this one, really liked the one that you're famous for. This one isn't as good. And she seemed like a very nice woman in the audience who wouldn't have said something unkind, and I think it would be a bit like saying, I really like your eldest child, like the middle one, not so keen, you never say that.
Yeah. I mean, it is a bit like that. And I suppose it's the phenomenon of the person making a comment that disguised as a question, but it's not a question at all, which is, as you will know, because, you do a lot of these things. That's one of the things that happens at big festivals. You get people who are actually more interested in making a comment than they are in actually asking a question.
Yeah.
But it's sad in a way that people feel, their feelings are hurt, and just because you might, in the case of the person you're talking about, be a famous writer and have a huge amount of success doesn't mean that you're not just as hurt as anybody else. And writers are notoriously fragile. I mean, your writer ego is a really sort of sensitive plant, and you can make a good fist of looking confident, but everyone I know as a writer is always sort of twisted up inside about anything they get back that's negative, and just as much people as anyone else. In fact, probably a good deal more vulnerable in some ways.
I think part of it was just somebody thinking aloud. That's one thing. But it's not realizing, like a writer might have spent a year writing this book, not going out and not seeing many people, and then to come out and bravely promote it in that way. And I have to say, the writer was absolutely brilliant. She just said, "Oh, I'm sorry to hear that," and then I, as chair, moved swiftly on to something else.
Yes, well, that's the skill of being a good chair, which of course you are, but it's not an easy job.
Yeah, sometimes you have to slightly stand up for the person. There've been a few odd ones, I must say, but generally people are kind of well-meaning. But like I say, it's this thinking aloud thing, and maybe I really don't know. There's a psychological puzzle for you, you see, figuring out why people say
Why
things
people
like that
do
to
that, yeah.
Yeah. Okay, so you're going to kill off all the other writers in Oxford and give me 5% royalties. I think we've sorted that out.
It's a deal.
Yeah, perfect. Well, good luck with the next one.
Thank you, my dear.
And I hope your TikTok wave continues riotously. And yeah, thank you very much for joining me in the book bag.
It was a pleasure. Thank you.
So goodbye from Oxford to Cara Hunter. Thank you, everyone, for joining me. I hope you've enjoyed that, especially crime fiction fans. Do like and subscribe and join me next time for another fascinating discussion with a wonderful author. We have been discussing the work of Cara Hunter and her latest book, Murder in the Family. Baffling, I tell you, baffling. Thanks for joining me. Goodbye.